There we go. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the July 11th informational webinar for the FY24 Fund Code 124 competitive grant. This is the Building Capacity for High Quality Instruction through EdTech grant from the department. I am AJ Cote, the Assistant Director in the Office of Educational Technology at DESE, and I am joined by a couple of my colleagues. Jackie, why don't you start and say hi?
Good morning, everyone.
And Eileen.
Good morning, everyone.
All right. So today's presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the OET website. And we're going to drop that link in the chat for you in just a moment. The presentation itself, the slides will not be shared, but the recording of this presentation will be shared. So let's move on to today's agenda. Today, we are going to go over the grant focus areas and priorities, which include elements of effective instruction. We're going to go over who's eligible to apply and what the competitive priorities will be for the grant this year. We're going to walk through how to apply and what's included in the application process, how funds can be used, and some of the required program information that we'll be asking of you. Finally, we'll save time for questions and answers at the end. And I just want to remind you that the grant is due, and I'll say this a few times, no later than 5 p.m. on August 3rd. So this grant, before we jump into all of the details, quick overview, has a maximum of $495,000 and change that will be awarded. It is actually fiscal year 24 through June 30 of 2024, and then FY25 through August 31st of 24. That will make sense when we get to some of the required forms. And just a note, again, no later than 5 p.m. August 3rd. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. We're going to cover all of the material first, and then we're going to take some time for questions at the end. So as we noted in the RFP itself, and we're going to also drop the RFP link, if one of my colleagues can just actually grab that, or I can. There you go. The actual RFP link is in the chat. As noted in that grant RFP, there are 3 main areas of focus for this year's grant, much like last year. We're looking for applicants to develop skills and competencies, and really looking to connect that to overarching district priorities, and doing so all while grounded in elements of effective instruction. So applicants will be asked if they're adopting or expanding existing programming to develop educator skills and capacity for using tech to deliver high quality PD. So strong applications are going to be clearly linked to how the proposed programming connects with the overall district priorities, all while showing evidence of how that proposal is grounded in effective elements of instruction. And Jackie is actually going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by effective instruction.
Thanks, AJ. So you can define effective instruction in a number of different ways. Many of you may have seen this already, but recently DESE came out with a new educational vision. And along with that vision has outlined several strategic objectives for how we would like to see students and schools achieve that vision. And so I'm putting the link in here. If you have not had an opportunity to see the new vision or to read through it, you can see it in this link here on pages 3 and 4. And along with this vision, again, in our strategic planning process, as a department, we have focused in on a few pieces. And AJ, could you move to the next slide? A few different pieces of where we are going to be focusing our efforts in the coming years to really support all of you in moving towards that vision. And so these are included in those strategic objectives on page 5 of this link. Further down from that, you'll see we've also organized all of the supports that we will be providing as a department this year related to those strategic objectives. So all of that to say that we have pulled much more specific elements of effective instruction from this vision and from this strategic objective and strategic planning process. And so in last year's grant, we were a little bit higher level when it came to, we're really looking to support programming that will impact instruction. And now we're getting even more specific. Because this is aligned with what the department is doing as a whole. So all that to say, we've listed out 4 specific areas of effective instruction this year that we are looking for tech-related PD to be directly linked to. One of them is culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. There is a hyperlink in the RFP that actually takes you to an explicit definition for what this means. High quality instructional materials. No secret, this has been an emphasis of the department for the last several years and is going to continue to be because we know the evidence and the research around it. Appropriate academic supports and interventions to enable all students access to grade appropriate instruction. So thinking about equitable access, you can look at your MTSS programming, your tier 2, your tier 3 interventions, looking to support those students with accessing high quality instruction. You could also think about within your tier 1 setting, within the classroom setting, how technology is opening up access for all students. And then engaging students in deeper learning. Similarly, this hyperlinks out to our deeper learning page and definition with more information there. Proposals do not have to directly link to all 4 of these elements of effective instruction. If it did, we might promote what you're doing because that sounds really impressive. But it does need to explicitly connect to at least one of these pieces. So a high quality proposal here will understand the definition as DESE is presenting it, and will be able to say that by engaging in this technology related PD, educators will ultimately be able to deliver more effective instruction in one or more of these ways. Okay, thanks. Adrienne.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jackie. And we are going to talk a little bit more about how you're going to explain your programming in just a bit. But first, let's talk about who can apply. So who is eligible to apply for this grant? Like last year, this grant is open to Massachusetts public school districts, charter schools, career vocational technical education schools, collaboratives, approved special education schools. But we also include the eligibility of non-LEA organizations. So these are organizations who may apply on behalf of an LEA or multiple LEAs. So this could be like a regional service center or a nonprofit that supports schools and districts with their EdTech related efforts. So again, all of those are available and eligible to apply. So we are focusing competitive priority, as you've seen in the RFP, but I just want to kind of voice over some of these. As we evaluate applications, competitive priority is going to go to candidates who, 1, serve traditionally underserved student populations. So that's including African American and Hispanic students, English learners, students with disabilities, and students from low-income families. But I just want to caveat to that is that the Office of EdTech is actually going to pull that information, that student demographic data, right from our district profiles. So you won't need to provide that in the course of your application. Secondly, districts who have current curriculum data submitted to DESE and have adopted high quality instructional materials will also be given the competitive priority. So we're going to pull this information directly from the curriculum data in district profiles. The curriculum data will need to be up to date for K-8 ELA literacy, for K-12 math, and for 6-8 science by the time the grant is due. And I'm going to throw a link in the chat because you can check to see if your information is up to date. But if not, you can talk to your director administrator, and you can follow some of the directions that are listed on the curriculum data collection webpage. There's information there, step by step, on how you can update that information. And so if the applicant is a non-LEA, you would want to make sure that any LEAs that you are applying on behalf of have their curriculum data updated in the directory. And then thirdly, we are looking for districts who've adopted and implemented digital literacy and computer science standards for students in the proposed grade ranges. We're going to talk more about this during the application itself, but what I do want to mention here is if you have not yet implemented DLCS, there is a grant available this year. And I see my friend Paula Moore nodding her head there. This is the FY24 Computer Science Engage grant. It is fund code 126, and it is due, I'm going to drop that information in the chat. It's due July 28th. So that one is due sooner than this grant. So if you have not yet implemented DLCS and you're looking for a possible way to do that, check out that grant as well. And then we're going to move on to say, okay, how do you apply? If you have ever applied for a DESE grant before, this is no surprise to you. There are a lot of forms. Yes, there are a lot of paper forms. And so what I will say is just please be sure to check the required forms and be sure to submit all of them as requested. Now, the reason I mention that is because this is FY24 and a couple of months of FY25, you're going to be asked, if your proposal spans those couple of months after June, to have 2 signature pages. So you'll have an FY24 and an FY25, just for the requested funds for each of those spans. Similarly, there'll be a part 2 budget form that you'll have 2 of those forms for. And then part 3 will be your narrative and program information. We'll go into that in just a bit. And then part 4 is applicable to those who are applying on behalf of other LEAs. So you'll need some kind of contract or MOU to show that there is an agreement between the applicant and the districts that they're applying on behalf of. I would also note that if multiple districts did want to come together, there's the possibility of filing a Schedule A as well. So you're all familiar with all of the fun DESE forms, but I just wanted to point out that it would be that there could be 2 signature pages, 2 budget pages, and a part 3, and then any other applicable forms. So just keeping that front of mind for you. And I'm actually going to have Eileen talk to us about how we can actually use this money.
Thank you. So yes, how can these funds be used? As AJ said, we have just under 500,000 to award in this grant. So the funds requested will be expended, as AJ is pointed out, during FY 2024 through June 30th, 2024, and through FY 2025, which goes through August 31st, 2024, if that's how it's requested. So you'll need to provide information in your narrative to support a few things. How will the funds be used to adopt or expand building capacity programming? How the requested use of funds directly aligns to the areas of effective instruction that Jackie talked about, and how the requested funds are appropriate and reasonable for the scope of the proposed program, including the total number of staff and students impacted by the funding. A couple of notes about allowable and unallowable use of funds that we need to point out. Allowable uses include supporting programming costs, and these include up to 10% of the funds that may be used for materials and supplies, and up to 20% of the funds that could be used for program coordination. Unallowable uses of grant funds include equipment and software, such as devices, laptops, smart boards, software subscriptions, travel or lodging, and food or drink.
All right, thank you, Eileen. And the allowable and unallowable really for us relates directly to helping build the capacity of our staff or students to use the materials we already have. We had such an influx of equipment and software over the pandemic. What we want to do is, instead of buying more, we want to do better with what we have, because sustainability wise, we're going to be looking at that in the future. So let's look at the required program information, and this is the proposal section. So part 3 is required program info. It's a Word document, and there are 5 sections that you can see on the screen here. So one of those sections, going back to the DLCS implementation, is providing evidence for DLCS implementation for the grade span requested in the proposal. So what do we mean by evidence? Good question. There are a bunch of things that you could use as evidence. So do you want to provide us course listings or descriptions of classes that have DLCS implementation as part of them, or they are DLCS classes? Have you and your staff been participating in DESE sponsored workshops or events? Do you have implementation plans for rollout of DLCS related coursework or curriculum in your district or in those grade spans? Again, there is a list there. What I would say to you is reach out with any questions if you're considering, you know what, AJ, what do you mean by evidence of, and would this be sufficient to show evidence of? So I think at the end, we're going to provide you an email address, and it is the email address that will have all of our information for the grant going to and from. And so that's where you'd be able to ask questions if you have any concerns about being able to show evidence of DLCS implementation for those grade spans. So again, it can be a PDF. It can be stuff that we're pulling from the DESE website. It could be links to your school websites, any of those things. So the evidence of DLCS implementation is only one of those things that is limited by your imagination. So feel free to provide the information that you see to support that. Next, this is easier said than done, but please be as concise as possible. The middle school teacher in me comes out when I say more words doesn't mean a better answer. So we want you to be able to answer all of the questions in the proposed programming section of the proposal. There are going to be questions about what the professional learning will be and who the target audience is. We want to know if this is new programming or how it ties to previous professional learning efforts. We want to know how this proposal is linked to your district's strategic plan, including which of the elements of effective instruction you'll be embedding into the programming. We want to know how you've engaged stakeholders in the development of this plan or proposal for PD, and then how you plan to continually solicit their feedback throughout the grant period. We want you to be very clear about your end goals of this proposed programming and be able to articulate that. So what is it that you hope to accomplish? And then how are you going to measure the effectiveness of meeting this goal? Then ultimately, we know funding doesn't last forever. So how do you plan to sustain these efforts beyond the grant period? You're going to be asked to give a proposed, and I say proposed timeline of activities. This doesn't need to be extremely detailed, but it should provide enough information for us to see how the programming activities and milestones map out alongside their proposed success measures and criteria. Now that's a lot of information for one slide, but All of the questions and prompts will be in that Part 3 document for you. And then, as many of you are familiar with some of the DESE requirements for evaluation, we will have an assurance as part of this grant application, so that we're asking participants to agree to participate in evaluation efforts. And what does that include? It could be digital equity self-assessment. It could be mid-year surveys, end-of-year data collection, and reporting on implementation and the impact of the programming. We may have you report out on the success measures that you identified earlier in your proposal. So that is just a checkbox and a yes, we will play the game with you. And we're looking forward to seeing some of these applications. We have covered quite a bit of information in a short amount of time. We can have you add questions in the chat, or we can have folks raise their hands to ask any questions. But what we will say is, hi friends, I have messaging. Hi, happy summer, everyone. What I will say is, if you leave this webinar and you think I have more questions, please feel free to email us. I'm going to put the email up on the screen just for a second. It is k12edtech@mass.gov. So any questions can go there, but let's stop sharing for a moment and see if there are any questions, and we'd be happy to voice over, or you can drop them in the chat. And while people are thinking about questions, what I will say is that we had last year 7 grant recipients for the FY23 version of this grant. Okay, there were 7 recipients representing 17 LEAs, I believe. And what I would, just as a factual statement, is that this is not technically a continuation of last year. This is a new grant with a new grant application. So I would encourage everyone to think of it that way. I'm seeing a couple of questions. Yes, Ben, can funds be used to provide stipends to teachers to attend PD and do additional work outside of the school day? Absolutely. Mentioned grade level several times, focusing on specific grade or school. Brendan, great question on that. It does not need to be a specific grade or grade span. Sometimes we see that folks will apply on behalf of like the math department or ELA literacy. So we say that quite a bit because that is what we've seen in a lot of the applications. I think we're defaulting to saying grade or grade span or subject, but again, the proposals, yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
It also came up with DLCS implementation. And so again, it's not a requirement, but it is a competitive priority for the professional learning programming to be working in an area where DLCS has already been implemented to some degree. And so if you are showing evidence that DLCS has been implemented, and you are focusing on a subset of grade levels or areas or even schools, that would give you a competitive priority if there's alignment there. So that's another area that it's come up quite a bit.
I'd also like to answer, Crystal, can we bring someone in for a specific training on implementation of current tools? We acknowledge that it can't be used for housing and travel. Absolutely. We have had, last year, we had a variety of different approaches for this grant. We had folks that developed and implemented their own professional development. We had folks that brought in a vendor and they managed the vendor. And then we had other approaches where a nonprofit did all of the organizing and then applied on behalf of districts. So this is intentionally left open to all of your imagination. Interesting. Assuming the provider fees and staff stipends are separate from the 20% from the program coordination. As I understand the question, yes, that is separate. So if you bring in a vendor, you are paying the vendor, and then the staff stipends also separate from that. The 20% max for program coordination is if you were going to pay one of your employees to manage the grant, or someone to manage the grant. More questions? I know everybody's shy today. All cameras are off. That is absolutely fine with me. Hi, Karen.
I didn't want you to have like this phobia of like, there's nobody with their camera on. So, you know, I want to
See,
say
the thing is as an only child, I talk to myself all the time. So I'm good. I'm good with all the black boxes. I can keep going. I can talk paint off a wall. So thank you though. I do see Thomas said, can funds be used for stipend for in-district training in both individual and PD group training? Like for absolutely. Yes, Thomas, that is acceptable.
AJ, I'm not sure if you followed up on this one directly, but I did want to touch back on the training on implementation of current tools. I think what's important to remember is that this is really heavily focused on pedagogy and less on adoption and sort of high level implementation of quote unquote tools. And so I would just want to make sure that in thinking about what that training is focused on, what the goals are of that training, again, is really directed to the specific elements of effective instruction, and less on improving the usage of specific tools. The grant is tool agnostic, and we want to make sure that we're building the pedagogy of educators within that. So just want to overemphasize that because we did get questions around this quite a bit this past year.
Any other questions?
AJ, I have one, just back to the digital literacy standards. So in my context of multiple districts, would it be, it's a competitive priority, clearly, I think you've said that. If we had, say, 5 of the 7 districts that had adopted and 2 had yet to adopt, would that be acceptable in a proposal, or would we need all those participating in whatever we come up with to be having adopted those by the time we apply?
So I think that's an interesting question, Brendan, because I know for those on the call, Brendan has a little bit of a different setup out in the Berkshires because they have a consortium of districts that work together. What I would say to you is when we had mentioned in the competitive priority for DLCS, one of the possible evidence of implementation could be an implementation plan. So if in fact 5 of the 7 have fully implemented DLCS and the other 2 are on their way to it, you could include that information. But again, as a competitive priority, I think, to be candid, we are looking for districts who have fully implemented DLCS for the proposed either grade, span, subject, etc.
Great. Thanks so much.
Also, Brendan, I would add too, it doesn't disqualify applications.
Right.
It's fully appropriate to apply, even if you don't 100% meet the competitive priorities. I think it's just important to know that if others do, they will get a higher weight on that area of the proposal evaluation. So I highly recommend, if you all think you have high quality programming proposals, you should absolutely apply, as long as you meet the eligibility requirements. We just want to be really upfront with how we're weighting the applications with a limited amount of funds.
I also, Sarah, I see your hand. Give me 1 second. I would also note, for those who may not have applied last year, what's interesting about this grant is we are not giving people a set amount of funds. We're asking you to request what in this proposal, what would be appropriate for assisting you to help build capacity in that way. So again, that's why we mentioned that it's less than $500,000, just under $500,000 for everyone. So would we love to give it to 400 districts? Yes, but then that spreads the pot very thinly. Sarah, go ahead.
Well, like Brendan, I'm also in a unique situation in that I'm a Commonwealth school, and the Commonwealth schools have to have a curriculum set by the state, not set by, approved by the state. So we don't, and the virtual curriculum are not listed in Curate. I've been all over the place. So I'm Jackie, you've been really helpful saying, go ahead and apply, even if you don't meet all the criteria. But I really need to know if because we have to use Florida Virtual School, which we have to change out the wazoo because it's got some issues. Does that immediately remove a Commonwealth school from the pool of candidates?
Great question. No, it does not. The first thing I would ask is whether or not that data is reflected in our curriculum data repository. That's one piece of this, is just making sure that we have that data available at the department. So we know not every district has submitted that data first. So that's one piece of it. It does not disqualify you. Again, it's one piece of the full application review. It's not a requirement that, you know, there are a lot of subject areas and grade levels that don't have a very robust list on Curate right now. So we fully acknowledge that. But it does improve the effectiveness of PD and of pedagogy if that is in place. And so we have it as a priority because we know it's more likely to have a positive impact if those things are paired together, but it does not disqualify you. And we are, you know, AJ reviewed a lot of different areas of the application process. That curriculum data is one piece of it. DLCS data is one piece of it. It gives you some points that are worth a little bit more weight than others, but there's, you know, the program description, the link to high quality or high effective instruction, all of those things are very important too. So we're going to be looking at and evaluating these holistically. There will just be some weighting on those areas that might give others more points.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the question, Sarah. I also want to point out, I believe it was Crystal mentioned, had a question in the chat. Do you have examples of the grants that were successful in the last round? That was an excellent question because I did want to point out on our OET homepage, we have a fund code 124 grant recipient kind of overview document that actually just kind of gives high level of what some of the grants were for last year. So that PDF link is there, and it's also it's in the chat, and it's also on our homepage.
Just as a note, AJ, I think it's important to point out too that we have shifted the application
Correct.
requirements and the competitive priorities is slightly from last year.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that they would all receive the same points this year, but it does give you a good indication of some of the variety of programming and things that have been approved in the past.
Mm-hmm. In the spirit of continuous improvement, we updated as well. Any more questions? And this is obviously not your only time to ask questions. We encourage you to reach out via email, and Paula Moore, who is here, had dropped a link to the Computer Science Engage grant as well. So if you have questions, you can reach out to her on that one.
AJ, I did want to do a quick note too, just on the evaluation and research engagement. Yes, it is a checkbox to say you are open to engaging in that process with us. I just want to speak a little bit to why. And one of the reasons that we were able to access funding for this grant is because we are tying it to impact on students and outcomes. It is ESSER funded, so we are required to report on the outcomes of the funds here. So one is a federal requirement that we do need to collect information and data on impact. So that's why we do need to collect that impact data from you. But one of the things that we've been really excited about with this grant, both this past year and this future one, is to be able to showcase different strategies that folks are employing to build this capacity. It's an increasing need from across the state and across the country. And so we really want to use this as a way to highlight what folks are trying, what some of those successes are, what some of those challenges are. So we don't just see this as an opportunity to support you, and we hope that anybody who would be a recipient of funds would also be open to sharing some of those successes and struggles and approaches with the state. And so that's why it's left a little open, because we do want to see who, is awarded the funding and how we can best showcase that so that everybody can collectively learn from the experience. So please don't be overwhelmed. We do try to keep in mind not overburdening schools and districts in that process, but would love to work with you much beyond just giving the money to make sure that we're all learning from the process.
Thank you, Jackie. And I don't know if it's Lee or Leah. Can you tell me if I'm saying that? Which way should I be pronouncing it?
It's Leah.
Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
Leah, there is no deadline for submitting questions. So just knowing that the sooner you have your question answered, the sooner you can, work on your application. And I will say that we are pretty concrete when it comes to the timestamp of 5 p.m. on August 3rd. So if you have questions, I would encourage you to get them in before then. And I also encourage you to send your applications in before that 4:59 mark on August 3rd. Can you tell I taught middle school for 15 years? So no deadline on the questions. Anybody else? This is the epitome of wait time. All right. I think we're good. We will post the recording on our featured links of the OET homepage, but I want to thank you all for being here on a finally sunny, not rainy day in Massachusetts in July. Have a wonderful summer and look to be in touch with all of you.